What's up everybody? On today's video we're going to talk about the effects of SB1718, the immigration law that took effect in Florida. We've had enough time now to see how this law is actually going to affect the state of Florida, and in today's video that's the information that I'm bringing forward to you. This business in Oneiko, Florida, right outside of Bradenton, was open and today it is closed. Hispanic business districts in places like Fort Myers and Bradenton lost a significant portion of their customers. But even more affected than Hispanic business districts has been tourism in the state. A hotel in South Beach directly on the water that usually goes between $300 to $600 is now under $200. The JW Marriott on Marco Island, which rarely goes under $600, is now for $400. I've wanted to stay at this hotel for years now, and this is the lowest rate I've ever seen. If you can get this hotel for less than $600, it's really a low day. Most of the tourism in the summertime, which is Florida's off season, comes from Latin America. With the vast majority of those tourists now gone, beaches that were completely packed before SB 1718 are now completely empty. I changed my stance on illegal immigration. I was always against deporting people, but I really do believe that we need to find out who's been mowing these lawns since the Guatemalans left and deport them, because what they're doing is a dang atrocity. Look at this crap. Is it you? Look at the atrocity of landscaping work that didn't rake it up or clean it up. Who the crap is mowing this lawn, and why are they so angry at the world? They didn't even make it to this side. They just kind of got the hill. It's really a shame that this park is in this condition. Clearly the reason that this park is in this condition is because the people that were working here left after SB 1718. You know, the people that are doing this job now, they're American citizens, but they apparently have no self-respect in their work. When this is what you give, this is what you're giving your community. Yet a Guatemalan who's not from here was mowing this lawn and taking care of this park a few months ago. He cared more about America than who did this. Whoever did this, you're the one who needs to get deported. But not only are the customers gone, but the workers that are left behind are completely incompetent, and many times the incompetent conditions that those workers are creating are becoming a liability for companies and local government as well. It's not just an unsightly and distasteful lack of effort, it's starting to become a liability for a lot of places, because the workplaces, parks, and areas that people are venturing into, like this park in Lakewood Ranch, Florida, are becoming overgrown, and eventually that could lead to injuries. And many corporations are finding that now their employees that are replacing the people they had before are not only incompetent at the jobs, but they're also a huge liability because their incompetence leads to hazardous conditions. Take this brand new police substation in Manatee County, Florida, in Lakewood Ranch. Not only is the grass overgrown and unsightly, but the lack of maintenance of a new sprinkler system has led to the buildup of mold in the parking lot, which could eventually cause an injury to one of our police officers. The lack of maintenance at this brand new police substation has caused the buildup of algae on the sidewalks, where the police officers exiting their vehicles could potentially hurt themselves by slipping. The lack of effort from these new employees who are doing the jobs that the illegals were doing before is not just causing an unsightly mess in communities, it's also leading to conditions that could lead to injuries, which is the real reason that insurance rates in the state of Florida are increasing now more than ever, is because the incompetence of the new labor force is putting a lot more people at risk. So if you've wondered why after SB 1718 your insurance premiums may have gone up, it's simply because now there's a huge amount of liabilities. Take a look at this police substation. In some places the grass is over 26 inches tall. With less customer, a worse equipped labor force, and more liabilities, you can see how businesses and government agencies in Florida are currently hurting from the implementation of this new law. However, the interesting thing about this law is that it's not visually being enforced. It was just an incentive to scare away people that were here illegally, and thus most people who left the state of Florida were actually people that were in mixed legal status households, like parents who had US born citizens or marriage mates where one of them wasn't fully legal. Which means that many of the people who actually left the state of Florida were semi-functional, semi-legal families who have aspirations to stay in the United States for a longer period of time because many of their family members are already US citizens, and thus they moved to other states. The ones that stayed behind are the single males, low-income migrant workers, and these people are still present everywhere in the state of Florida. In other words, the law encouraged people who were in a semi-legal state to leave the state of Florida, but those who were completely illegal, like migrant workers doing hard day labor, a lot of those people stayed behind. And since there isn't a visible presence of enforcement of this law, there haven't been immigration raids, there haven't been DUI checkpoints, there hasn't been anything really to try to visually reinforce the presence of this law. What we're seeing now is that many migrants are slowly starting to return to Florida, but these are single males who are migrants and have no intentions of ever becoming legal in the United States, while the semi-legal families that were in the state of Florida are definitely never coming back. So despite how harsh this law appeared to be on paper, in practice, not much is going to get better for Florida's real illegal population, the migrant workers coming to do low-paying jobs. Many better-paying jobs in fields like medicine and hospitality that were lost are simply being replaced by migrants from other parts of the country that are legal, which means that the sentiment motive behind this law, which was to get rid of people who were not white American citizens, has made no effect, because now you're just having people from Pakistan, India, and other parts of the world who are legal moving to Florida to do those same jobs that are now vacant, since the labor force that's presently in Florida simply isn't educated enough to take on these jobs in fields like medicine. The real motive behind this law wasn't to curb illegal immigration. It was simply to drive home the message that the state of Florida is racist and unwelcoming to migrants. However, the absence of these illegal migrants has only encouraged other migrants who do have their documents to come to the state of Florida to fill those voids, which means that now you're not just going to have migrants from Latin America, you're going to start to see a lot more Asian migrants move to Florida to take those jobs. Migrants who are legal. These migrants actually make more money, they are all mostly legal, and they're less liked by the people in Florida who pushed SB1718, which means that now you have new groups of immigrants that are more equipped, have more power of acquisition than the Latinos that were here. It is possible that now an increase of immigrants from Asia and Europe will make Florida a more diverse place, because the need for those jobs is still in place. And these migrants, on the other hand, are U.S. citizens, which means that Florida will become a more diverse place, just of higher legal status. And that definitely wasn't the intention of this law. The intention of this law was to get rid of minorities, not to encourage minorities that were legal to move to Florida. Basically, this law backfired. Despite the fact it was presented as an anti-immigration law, it was really backing the sentiment of anti-immigrant feeling, whether legal or not. And what the law has done is actually create an opportunity for immigrants that are legal to fill in those voids. Despite the new openings in jobs, incomes in Florida have not improved, and many of the homeless population who complain about illegals having their jobs have done absolutely nothing to take up the positions that were left behind. They are simply a liability to these corporations, and they're not going to be hired. Overall, not much has really changed in the state of Florida, and it still feels like the same place. But a lot of these Latino communities are really economically hurting. And we've started to see a trend in Florida where any building that becomes vacant immediately gets broken into by homeless people, and they completely trash and destroy the structure. Again, this is just simply more liability to the people that own those buildings. The real estate market has also been affected negatively. We've seen the openings of for rent signs that are not getting filled in. On a recent trip to Tampa, Florida, we noticed an abundance of for rent signs for single family homes. This is a rarity in Florida since the year 2020. It's been almost impossible to find rents in the Tampa area. And apartment complexes in the suburbs of Tampa are actually seeing a decline in their rents, when for a while people have only seen rent increases, which goes to show that there's much less demand for Florida real estate since this law took place. In Bradenton, Florida, we've even noticed streets where there are several for rent signs on the same street. We went back over a month later to verify if these properties were still vacant, and nobody had moved in yet. The signs were still there. Despite the fact this law sounded like it was going to turn Florida into Alabama, in reality, this law was more of a publicity stunt than it was an actual change in the way Florida functions. When Donald Trump was elected president, we saw the migrant Mexican communities move out of Florida. But by 2019, migrant groups from Haiti and Dominican Republic, as well as Venezuela, had filled their place, and actually there were more illegals in Florida then than before. And in a few more years, the illegal immigration situation in Florida will probably be the same again. Eventually, corporations are going to find out that their legal workers are more liability to them than the illegals and the punishments that come along with that, and they're going to start to hire illegals again. And it's understandable too that the paying customer isn't going to put up with these butcher landscaping jobs forever, and they're going to want their properties maintained and cared for properly. Interestingly enough, it's the people who complain about the illegal situation the most who are affected the most by the lack of immigrants, and eventually they're the ones who are going to suffer. So we can say that overall not much has changed in Florida. The vacancies that exist will eventually get filled up again. Who has benefited greatly from this law is big corporations, in particular developers. The opening up of affordable real estate will put an end to single-family home new construction, which was predominantly owned by Hispanic business owners and developers. And we're likely to see a lot more massive development projects, which is probably something the people who didn't want the illegal immigrants wanted even less than the illegal immigrants, is these massive construction projects, because the destruction of single-family home construction and affordability openings means that larger developers will have access to the labor force, and we've seen how they have actually been more destructive to Florida than the people that took your jobs. You see, big developers were able with this law to slide in other laws that are going to benefit them when they go to build these massive developing projects. Projects that are going to include HOAs. Single-family home construction is in areas where you don't have that, which means that in the future in Florida, there'll be less availability of affordable housing, and more people are going to be forced into these larger developments that will definitely include hefty HOA fees. So while the vast majority of us are going to have to deal with incompetent people when we go to businesses, these big developers are now going to have access to a huge labor force that was before being used for single-family home construction in areas that didn't have HOAs, lots that were owned by individuals. In the future, these types of constructions are going to be more rare in Florida, and already in places like Lehigh Acres in Melbourne, we've seen a huge slowdown in single-family home construction. So we can expect in the future to see single-family home construction, which is in the hands of regular people like me and you, to be a thing of the past, and to see most of Florida's construction projects to be in the hands of larger developers. With most construction companies being in the hands of Hispanics, it was a matter of time before the state of Florida crippled that sector of the economy to make sure that Latinos couldn't get ahead. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, the new E-Verify laws means that regular builders and contractors cannot risk getting caught with illegals. But if you're a big developer and you have 500 illegal immigrants working on a job site, you'll be able to afford the daily fine for having those workers there, which means that big developers will be able to continue using illegal immigrants, but most small contractors can't. Big business getting stronger and small guys having less opportunities to make money, making it harder for the little guy, making it easier for big developers. Basically, these E-Verify laws didn't really prevent illegals from being able to be used at job sites. It just made it expensive, too expensive for a guy that has less than 25 workers. If a guy's got 300 or 400 illegal workers, he can definitely bear the cost of the daily fine required of doing so. Most of these builders are going to have 25, 30, 40 workers under their belt, which means they simply won't be able to afford the daily fine. But a large developer absolutely can pay the daily fine. A lot of Floridians failed to notice that SB1718 was going to highly favor large developers and destroy small businesses. When I studied SB1718, I told you guys that I thought that these laws would highly favor developers, but I was the only YouTuber saying that. Now there's a YouTuber who actually went out there and explained exactly which developers paid the governor how much money to make sure that those laws took place. You may have seen that YouTube video on the internet where a single developer gave the governor access to some crazy expensive golf course simulator, and there's more to it. It was one of those stories where when I read the law, I could clearly tell that it benefited developers, but now we have YouTubers who've actually exposed who those developers are, how much money they pay the governor, and beyond any reasonable doubt, we understand that these laws took place to benefit large developers. And that's the beauty of catering to the lowest common denominator of hate, which is if you pretend like you hate somebody that they hate and make laws that make those people happy, you can slide a bunch of other crap underneath the belt, meaning that the people of Florida thought they were getting something, but now they're finding out that it was really something else. You would have known that if you're watching my videos. When I first started to read these laws, I could clearly tell how these laws were going to benefit these developers and screw a lot of regular people like me and you and small contractors totally out of business. And just look at Bradenton, Florida, where on one side of the road you have a business that failed that's been turned into a homeless camp, and on the other side of the road you have an incredibly large, expensive luxury apartment complex going in. The theme in Florida is to continue to outprice the poor people, make life expensive for the poor people, to increase property taxes and insurance rates for the poor people, to make way for the rich developers. Lee County, Florida, where the rich people on the beach who had their cars submerged in 14 feet of storm surge didn't have their car insurance rates go up, but people in Lehigh Acres who are in 14-foot elevation, they're watching their car insurance rates rise because there's a lot of fraud in that neighborhood. And there are laws like the Fair Housing Act laws that prevent these insurance companies and real estate investors from doing this in the real estate world. But when it comes to auto insurance, there are no laws, and Hispanics and blacks in Florida are proportionally going to end up paying more for auto insurance than the rich whites along the beach. And well, any white person living in Florida who can't afford to live on the beach will be in the same boat as well. Basically, where the cost of being poor in Florida is more of the cost of being rich. It costs more money to be poor than it does to be rich. That's the model. That's the way Florida works. And if you live in Florida, if you've been in Florida for many years like me, you understand the notion that every single day the poor get poorer and the richer get richer. And this law is just another example how life in Florida has become more difficult for the average person because we can't bear these liabilities. Sure, a big building, a big company can afford these liabilities, but if you're a small person and you only got a few employees, you can't put a crackhead on a roof, because if he falls, you can't afford to take that loss. So while you are not allowed to hire an illegal immigrant, you can guarantee that these developers that have massive job sites will definitely have a few hundred illegals pay the fine comfortably, and that is how these laws work. So to summarize the video, no, not much has changed in Florida. The same pattern of things that we've been seeing happening in the state are just happening at a more refined level. Developers and big builders having more access to the labor force, and small guys, small companies, small builders, individual contractors, we are seeing life become more difficult. Alright guys, that is Florida's new immigration law. Yes, there are more properties for rent. Yes, a lot of businesses have had to close. Yes, a lot of small contractors are finding it difficult to get labor. But the big developers are going to have absolutely no problem making larger profits and having less competition. Finally, a trivia question. Did you know that the state of California's Latino population is more legal by percentage than states like Alabama and Arkansas? Yes, states that actually make it hard for illegal immigrants actually draw a larger percentage of their migrant communities to be illegal because of the lack of opportunity. When states like California allow illegal immigrants to have opportunity, it actually draws more legal immigrants to that state. Means that a state like California actually has a larger percentage of legal immigrants than a place like Arkansas and Alabama that have harsh immigration laws. Immigration is a subject that a lot of people are very emotional about, but they're not very educated about. In the case of illegal immigrants in Florida, it's the people who wanted them gone the most who are going to suffer the most from their absence. And the people who are banking the most of exploiting those people are actually going to be able to do it now on an even bigger scale. And we know from analytics that the counties with the elderly population and smallest Latino communities are the ones who need those communities the most, because they have an elderly population who needs access to services. And it's ironic how the same people who complain about unaffordability in their retirement are the same ones who are trying to destroy the source of the affordability for the services that they need. If that's not the most moronic thing you've ever heard, welcome to the United States of America. And by the way, does anybody know why the Naples Pier hasn't been restored after Hurricane Ian? Those houses that we're looking at here, some of them pay over $100,000 in property taxes a year. Yet, the pier continues to be closed. Is there a reason why the city of Naples doesn't want that pier to go back up? Perhaps the rich snobs don't want to see tourists going to the pier. A lot of people in Naples feel that the reason it hasn't been opened again is because the city of Naples just doesn't want regular people going to the pier and taking up parking spaces. They want that whole place all to themselves. And the last thing they want to see is people like me and you enjoying the Naples Pier, because they want that whole area just to themselves. And as we've seen, the Naples Pier has not been put back together, and it doesn't seem like they're making any efforts to do it anytime soon. Does anybody else watching also agree with me that the reason they're not rebuilding the Naples Pier is just to keep regular people out of that area? Originally, it used to be called the Naples Fishing Pier, but they've even started to ban fishing on the pier during the weekends when the regular people are able to go. During the weekdays, they allow it because they want to go fishing, but they don't want you, the working class person, to enjoy fishing. And that's really the way Florida works. They simply, the very wealthy, very rich, they want this whole place to themselves, and well, forget about the rest of us. Increasingly, the state of Florida is becoming like California or New Jersey, where everything caters simply to the rich and makes life impossible and difficult for the poor. And we used to think that that kept the riffraff out and made Florida a safer place, but we're starting to see now an increase in homicides in affluent and suburban areas, which means that the increased cost of living hasn't really weeded out the bad people, because apparently now a lot of the bad people can afford to live in some fairly nice neighborhoods, which means that now, even though you pay a lot of money to live in a quote-unquote safe suburban or even gated community, crime is now at your doorsteps. I recently made a video exposing the increase in white homicides in rich suburban areas, and I lost over 100 subscribers because of that video. And it seems interesting to me how the facts, the truth, is no longer what people want to hear. If I made a video saying a bunch of lies that sounded pretty to them, they would love it. But when you start to point out real information that doesn't match people's narratives, all of a sudden, they don't want to hear the truth. But like I've told you guys before, I'm not here to be a crowd pleaser. I'm here to give you accurate information on what's happening in Florida. But when the audience only wants to hear things that matches their narrative or their perception, and they don't want to hear something that goes against what they want to believe, they simply tune out.